Hi, my name is Raphael Mudge, and welcome to part 2 of penetration testing with Cobalt Strike. This is the lecture on remote attack. In this lecture, we're going to talk about Hacking 101. I'm going to show you how to scan a host, find which services are open, and match those services to exploits, and hopefully get a session. I'm also going to talk about how to do this not for one host, but how to do it for potentially thousands of hosts. And when we do that, we're going to talk about the host management features in Cobalt Strike. We'll also talk about the reporting features in Cobalt Strike as well. Here's where we're at in the process. We're going to talk about reconnaissance as it relates to remote attack. We'll talk a little bit about using credentials, and we'll talk about launching remote exploits. So what is the remote attack process? It's pretty simple, really. Step 1, scan for hosts. Run a tool like Nmap, discover which services are open, analyze those, choose an attack, and launch it. Here are a couple of exploits you should be aware of. Metasploit has about 800 exploits in the framework. I'll be honest though, some are more useful than others. Now, these are a couple of the more famous ones. MS08067 Net API. It's the full path to its exploit, Windows SMB MS08067 Net API. It's probably the most famous exploit in Metasploit. This is a remote exploit against SMB in a Windows XP 2003 era box. It's also incredibly reliable and makes for a great demonstration. MS09050 SMB2. This is a Windows Vista exploit. Works against Service Pack 1, Service Pack 2. There's also MS03026 DCOM, good against Windows 2000 era boxes. It's strange in 2012 to be mentioning that, but strangely enough, particularly in networks with industrial control systems, Windows 2000 is still out there, lurking, waiting for you to find it and send it a bouquet of MS03026 DCOM. Here we are in Cobalt Strike. It's one thing to talk about the process, it's another to see it. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's kick off an Nmap scan. To do that, go to Host, Nmap Scan, and available to you are several different Nmap Scan profiles. I recommend, if you're just playing around with the tool in the lab, use QuickScan OS Detect. This scans a subset of the 65,000 ports that could be open, scans the most common ones, and it also uses Nmap's OS detection magic to figure out the operating system of the scanned host. So let's go ahead and kick that off. I'll go ahead and put in a range of the hosts we want to scan, press OK, and away we go. You'll notice that Cobalt Strike gives back the exact syntax it used to launch the scan. So if you had a different set of Nmap parameters you wanted to use, you could just open up a console tab, use dbNmap, put in whatever you want. One thing I'd also like to point out is that depending on the number of hosts you have, the number of services, and the type of scan you selected, this process might take a really, really long time. Okay, as you can see, our scan is now complete. Cobalt Strike is foreshadowing an action we're going to take in a few minutes to find applicable exploits, but let's ignore that for a moment and press OK. Here in the Nmap tab, you'll notice we have all the output of the Nmap command. Very good. And if we scroll in our targets view, here are all the different targets that Cobalt Strike found through Nmap during our scan. Now I should point out something You should think of the targets view as being like a desktop. If I go to Auto Layout None, it's perfectly acceptable to move these hosts around however I see fit and to arrange them in whatever way I like. Okay? So that's just something I'm pointing out. But of course, if you like the orderly layouts, you can use Control S. That's a stack layout that puts all the hosts in a line. Another keyboard shortcut I'd like you to know about is Control A. This will select all the hosts in the targets view. Now if you want, you can actually go through all this Nmap output. I'm sure it's very nice to look at. But the easier way to look at it is to highlight all the hosts, right-click, and go to Services. And here's all the information that was acquired by Nmap in a nice table view. Now it's perfectly acceptable to sort these by host, sort by service name, sort by port, sort by this information field, so you can group like things together, whatever you like. Now in the past, experience would teach you as a penetration tester which exploits would work in which situations. If you were new to the game, in the past, you'd have to actually go to Google and look up each of these software versions and see which vulnerabilities might exist. In fact, when I'm penetration testing, I still do that because Metasploit doesn't have everything. It's a great exercise. But if you're interested in what Metasploit can do, there is a way to cross-reference all these open services with Metasploit's exploit database. Go to Attacks, find Attacks, and Cobalt Strike will look at the operating system and the open services and build a list of exploits for each host in the targets area. Here we are. The attack analysis is complete. It says we will now see an attack menu attached to each host. Wonderful. So let's go ahead and look at one of those. Here's a host. By the way, if you hover your mouse over a host long enough, you'll get a tooltip with some information about the operating system. Go right click. You'll notice this nifty attack menu now. Great. Here's that DCOM exploit I mentioned, some Oracle exploit, Samba exploit, and some SMB exploits. Kind of same thing. One thing I should point out, these exploits are not the exploits that will work. They are the exploits that may work. This list was just built by looking at the open port and the operating system. So even if this is a Windows XP exploit, if a Windows 7 host had the same port open, you would see these same exploits. Just keep that in mind. This feature helps narrow down the list, but it's not magic. Now if I want to launch an exploit, just go ahead and click on the exploit, and we get that module launcher dialog that we're already familiar with. To launch the exploit, just click Launch. It's already configured because the host is highlighted, and Cobalt Strike tries to do everything to set up the options in a smart way. When I click Launch, we get back a nice tab where all the exploit commands are run for us. And we have our lightning bolts. We have successfully compromised our first host with a remote exploit. Let me go ahead and move this guy over here. Let's get a couple more. Now you may notice, for example, here's a couple Windows 2003 era, XP era boxes. Here's something else you can do. You can highlight multiple hosts at once, Attack, SMB, MS08, and we'll still get the same module launcher dialog, except this time the rhost value is set to not one host, but two. And if I click launch, Cobalt Strike will launch this exploit against both of those hosts. This is a great time-saving feature if you see a lot of like hosts and you want to just try something at once against all of those hosts. And there we go. You can see we've got lightning bolts on both of these. Oops, auto layout none. Auto layout none is a way to turn off this snapping back to a particular position. So I've shown you how you can highlight multiple hosts and how Cobalt Strike will launch an attack against them. Another way to launch an exploit against multiple hosts is to sort by open port, if you like, or sort by info. Highlight a bunch of hosts. If you right click, you get the same menu as if you had right clicked the host in the targets area, and I can launch a module against all these hosts. Here we go. This time the module launcher dialog has far more hosts, and if I click launch, instead of getting an exploit tab for each host, we get back that Cobalt Strike has launched this exploit at these 9 different hosts. And it doesn't matter if this is 9 hosts, 100 hosts, it doesn't matter. Cobalt Strike doesn't open up tabs for each of them because if you had 100 tabs, it'd be kind of unmanageable pretty quickly. So the default is 4. If you exploit 4 or more hosts, Cobalt Strike will not open up a tab. And you'll notice we're starting to get a lot more lightning bolts from that last salvo we just fired off. Okay? Pretty cool. So that's another example of just how you can launch and attack at multiple hosts using Cobalt Strike. Now one last option that I didn't speak to as much, but if I do Control A and I search for a module, say MS08067, and double click it, we'll get back our usual module launcher with all the highlighted hosts in there. So that's another way you can launch a module at multiple hosts. You don't have to do attacks find attacks. If you know what you want, just highlight the hosts, search for the module, and double click it. Now to undo the search and go back to the normal module browser view, press enter, and it goes back to normal. Okay. Now I've shown you how to exploit hosts and how to do it in mass. Let's talk a little bit about how to use credentials. Earlier, I showed you in the first lecture how to use SSH_login. Cobalt Strike's pretty smart. Based on the open service data, it also creates a login menu, okay? And through this login menu, it presents different Metasploit modules that you can launch based on the open services on their host. Now, not all of these modules are going to give you a session, okay? Some cases, they're just a means for you to verify whether or not credentials work. But some of them will. As you know, SSH does. So if we go to Login SSH, Cobalt Strike is going to present to us a login dialog. Here, if we had any credentials in our database, they'd all be listed for us, so we could select a pair of them pretty quickly. I'm just going to go ahead and put in the username and password. If I had multiple credentials, I could hit check all credentials and Cobalt Strike would try all of them. But we're just going to do these right now and press launch. And Cobalt Strike's now going to do that usual suspect, the SSH_login for us. And you notice we have lightning bolts again. Now what else is cool is if I were to highlight multiple hosts with SSH open and launch that login module, this same login would be applied to all of those hosts at once. Now, the last thing I'd like to show you, since I've talked about how to scan hosts, how to match those hosts, how to match the open services to vulnerabilities, and how to log in using credentials, you'll notice after all this attacking that we have a lot of tabs open. Now, one way we can get rid of them is if I hold down Shift and click on this X, Cobalt Strike will close all tabs with the same name. It's also possible to right-click a tab and just say Close Like Tabs to do the same thing. In general, though, just press X to close a tab. Remote exploits are not magical keys into any system. In fact, it's pretty rare that you're going to get anything with remote exploit. Here are several reasons remote exploits may fail. First, there may be a firewall between you and your target. Nothing you can really do about that. It's also possible that the software that's running, the software behind that open service, is not vulnerable to any of our attacks. Let's say, though, hypothetically, that you're testing this out in a lab and you find out, this exploit should work. It's Windows XP Service Pack 2 box and MS-08067 Net API should work. Well, it's possible through maybe sending the wrong exploit several times or even scanning that the open service the exploit depends on is now in an unexploitable state. Because keep in mind, exploits are taking control of a running program by forcing a flawed condition. And exploits make a lot of assumptions about the state of the program when they're being exploited. And if the program is in a different state, the exploit's not really going to work. Which leads me to non-reliable exploits. Some exploits make more assumptions than others, and it just may be that the exploit doesn't work in your particular situation. I've also found that sometimes exploits don't work because I'm having a bad day, or maybe in my haste to launch the exploit at as many things as I can think of, I misconfigured it. That has actually happened to me before. It's also possible, due to some sort of protection measure between you and the target, that a session could not be established. There's a lot of reasons remote exploits may fail, so please be aware of that. It's possible you may have done reconnaissance using another tool. That's fine. Cobalt Strike welcomes all comers. If you scanned a network using Nmap, Nessus, Nexpose, Qualys, OpenVAS, Retina, any of these other tools up here, you can import that into Cobalt Strike. Now, one thing you may notice, though, if you're scanning large networks or importing lots and lots of hosts, is that the graph view becomes cluttered very quickly. In fact, for the demonstration I just did, I would say it was a little cluttered. Wouldn't you agree? For these situations, you'll want to use Table View. Go to the Cobalt Strike menu, select Set Target View, Table View. This will adjust the view from a graph with all the icons for each host to a table that looks like this. All the same information is available in Table View. A bold address with a red icon next to it and the little lightning bolts, that's a compromised host. The description field, that's filled in when a host has been successfully exploited with the name of the host and the username. The pivot information is displayed as well. If the pivot column has a value in it, then that means this is the address that traffic for the host in the address column is routed through. And a bold value in the pivot column means that the pivot is in use. Like I said, same stuff as the graph view. One thing I should say about graph view and table view both is they are limited to displaying 512 hosts at a time. This means you can only launch an attack against 512 hosts at once. Now, if you're scanning and penetration testing a larger network, particularly in a whitelisted type of situation, you will want to use Cobalt Strike's Dynamic Workspaces feature. Dynamic Workspaces are a way of defining filters for looking at all of your hosts. And these filters allow you to group hosts by network segment, open services, operating system, or even whether or not you have a session. Every workspace you create, you give it a name, and that name will show up in the Workspaces menu, and you can flip back and forth between them really easily. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that you can actually, for each of these fields, specify multiple values. I can specify multiple networks, like 192.168.95.0/24, comma, 192.168.12.0/24, and Cobalt Strike will display to me hosts that are in both networks. You can do the same with ports, and you can do the same thing with operating systems too. Here in the screenshot, I'm creating a workspace that shows all web servers, all hosts with port 80 or 443 open in the 192.168.95 through 255 network. Here we are, back in Cobalt Strike. Just to show you what I'm talking about in terms of an improved view, let's go to Cobalt Strike, Set Target View, Table View. And here we are. This is all the information on all the hosts we've compromised so far. You can see we don't have any pivots set up. We have the tooltip we had before just by hovering over a host. And you can see that all the Windows 2003 boxes have been compromised. Pretty cool. Also, if I highlight a host, I still get the same menu. So you can see that Table View is pretty much the same as Graph View. Now, let's go ahead and add some more hosts to our Table View. Go to Hosts, Import Hosts. Let me go to my desktop, and I'm going to import a Nessus scan. Here we go. It's uploading the Nessus file. And this Nessus file is now being imported into Cobalt Strike. All these hosts have been imported for us. And we can see the information on all these different hosts. You can highlight these hosts, look at the open service information determined by Nessus. Now that we've got some more hosts, let's look at the Dynamic Workspaces feature. Go to Workspaces, Manage, and here we can see the different workspaces I've already set up. I've created a workspace called Sessions Only that shows Windows systems with sessions. If I activate that, Cobalt Strike will change the view so we see only hosts with only Windows hosts with sessions. If I edit this workspace, remove the Windows criteria, hit Save, I can highlight it here, or I can go to Workspaces, Sessions Only, and now I will get all hosts with a session, which will include a Linux host. It's also possible I may want to look at hosts that are only on my current local network, so not the host that I imported through that vulnerability scan. If I activate that workspace, give it a moment to refresh. Here are all the hosts that we found out about from our Nmap scan earlier. If I click Add, I'll create a new workspace called Nessus Import, put in 192.168.0/24, click Add, I'll go through the workspaces menu this time. You see how that new workspace shows up. And what we'll see, now that I've selected that workspace, is all the hosts that I imported. That's dynamic workspaces. A very nice way to be able to dynamically create buckets of hosts to work with. There's one other feature I'd like to show you. If you search for an exploit, right-click the exploit and go to relevant targets. What this will do is it will create a new dynamic workspace with all hosts that are relevant to that module. So we'll look at both the operating system and open ports. If I hit OK, what we're going to see is all the different hosts that Cobalt Strike knows about that are relevant to this exploit. Why is that useful? Well, I can hit Control A, not in there though. I can hit Control A in here, double click this module, and this module is now configured to launch this attack against all of these hosts that are relevant. This is a really nice time-saving feature. So that's dynamic workspaces in a nutshell. Okay, so far in this lecture, I've shown you how to exploit hosts, how to scan hosts, and how to do this with a large number of hosts. Now I'd like to talk about Cobalt Strike's reporting features. If you go to the View menu, go to Reporting, you'll see a bunch of options, and here they are. There's the activity logs, and what these are plain text files organized by host and date that keep track of everything you've done during the engagement so far. Every open tab is logged automatically to an activity log. There's also the export data option. This will actually export everything Cobalt Strike knows in XML and TSV format. TSV is like CSV, except it uses tabs instead of commas as a separator. Finally, Cobalt Strike also gives you really nice looking PDF reports. There's the activity report, which is a timeline of the engagement, a client vulnerability report that we'll talk about later, a host report that shows all services, credentials, and vulnerabilities on a host-by-host basis, a social engineering report, and a vulnerability report. Here we are in Cobalt Strike, short time after our engagement's completed. Okay? One thing I didn't talk about, I mentioned you can go to View Reporting, see all these options, but say you've got an open tab. In Cobalt Strike, you can actually right-click, hit Save Screenshot, and Cobalt Strike will create a screenshot of that tab that you can copy and paste into your report later. Just kind of a cool little feature. Now let's go on to the other stuff. View, Reporting, Activity Logs. This will open up a folder, and here we are, organized by host, everything that's been done or captured so far. Okay? Here you can see we've taken a screenshot on this host, we've exploited it. I haven't done much on this computer yet, except the demos I've shown you so far, so there's not very much to look at. But if I open up this shell log, oops, yeah, we'll open a read-only copy, that's fine. Here are the different shell commands I've typed. Okay? So that's just an example of activity logging. Export data, as I mentioned, will export all of our data for us. Let's take a look at the host report. If I go to Reporting Host Report, I get back this dialog. Now, I can export every single host, the local network, hosts with active sessions only, or the hosts from that Nessus import. Basically, any workspace I created, I can choose to export hosts from that workspace only. So for the host report, we'll just do local network. And I can also customize the report a little bit by saying like host report for lecture 2 is the long title, and I can change the narrative. This is really useful information. Please pay my reasonable fee. Great. Now, to export the report, I just press export. And let's go ahead and save this to the desktop. Here you can see Cobalt Strike is querying the database. Generating PDF output. And great. We are now the mother and father of a nice host report. Let's go ahead and output a vulnerability report as well. View reporting vulnerability report. And I'm just going to do all hosts. I think that's okay. I'm just going to hit export. We'll dump this to the desktop as well. Hit save. And there we go. It's querying the database. A few more hosts this time. And now it's generating our PDF output. Report saved. Great. Let's minimize that. Let's have a look at these real quick. Here's the host report. I don't think I want to help improve the Adobe Reader experience right now. No, thank you. So here we are. You can see you get these nice, ready for print, professional looking reports. First page is the summary with the description we typed and the title we typed. And subsequent pages have each host, the operating system, MAC address, open services, everything we know about each of these hosts. Cobalt Strike also generates nice PDF bookmarks, so one can quickly navigate through this file. For example, here's 192.168.12.117. Here's all the open services. Here's the credentials that worked. And also, here are our successful compromises, including how long we held the box as penetration testers. And the vulnerability information is here as well. Hosts that were compromised have the lightning bolts around them. Hosts that were not compromised do not. So this is the host by host report. Again, something nice and professional that you can hand over to a client as a reference on some of the information that you collected during the engagement. Here's the vulnerability report. This is really nice because this report takes advantage of any vulnerability information you imported from another tool. Here we have bookmarks for each vulnerability sorted in alphabetical order. The first page of the vulnerability report, beyond the summary, are the compromises we've achieved. And it's possible for each of these compromises to click on it to jump right to that particular vulnerability. Here's all the information on the vulnerability, the hosts that were exploited, and the reference information as well. What CV number, OSVDB, just click the link, it'll take you right to it. And a lot of this information comes from the Nessus scan we imported earlier as well. So that's the Cobalt Strike vulnerability report. Again, something nice, professional, lightly branded, and print ready that you could use as an appendix to your narrative. In this first lecture, in this second lecture, I've shown you how to attack hosts using remote exploits. I've shown you how to scan a host, match the open services to known vulnerabilities, and launch exploits against 1, 2, and even 10 or 100 hosts at once. I've also shown you how to use Cobalt Strike's powerful Dynamic Workspaces feature to manage large network target sets and split them up into something more manageable. I've also shown you Cobalt Strike's reporting features that will help you reconstruct the engagement and give back accurate information to your client. This concludes Lecture 2 of Penetration Testing with Cobalt Strike.